everybody, it's Jo Parra, founder of the Ladies Working Dog Group. Are you feeling stuck with your gun dog training? Trust me, you're not alone, and that's exactly why you need to be here. Every week, we're bringing you the best tips and hacks to make training your gun dog easy peasy. We'll keep it straightforward, no fuss, just actionable guidance that you can put straight to use. So let's get started.
Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Found It, Fetched It. I'm joined with Claire Denyer and Samantha Thornycroft-Taylor. How are you guys today?
Very well, thank you, Gemma. Lovely to see you this afternoon. Hope everybody's doing really well.
I'm good, thanks, Jer. Hopefully you and Claire are as excited as I am about talking about this topic.
And for listeners that don't know who you are, can you just introduce yourselves?
Yes, so my name's Claire Denyer, and with my husband John, we run Family Dog Services based in Maidstone in Kent.
And I'm Sam Thornycroft-Taylor. I run Languedoc Dogs and Canine Foundation based in Gloucestershire.
And for those that don't know me, I am Gemma Martin and I run Whistle and Wag Dog Training based in Suffolk. And we are all group experts for the Ladies Working Dog Group. So today we were going to have a little chat about dog bites, dog attacks, things like that. It's in the papers again because very tragically we've lost another child to a dog attack. Guys, what's your feeling on the sort of dog attacks lately? Do you think that they're more publicised now or they're genuinely happening more?
I feel like the press are grabbing hold of these stories a lot more. And I think also because of the power of social media, we're much more aware of dog attacks. But I think that personally, I think that social media has a big part to play in irresponsible dog ownership as well, which I honestly believe has a hand to play in possibly some of the dog attacks that we're seeing happening. Sam?
Absolutely. I think there's no doubt that with the increase in social media now that we see more and hear more and people put out there more everything that's going on, I think dog attacks certainly happened in the past, but I think there's probably a small percentage of me thinking that actually there are generally more dogs now than there were back then anyway as well. So I think it all feeds in to one another. Gem?
Yeah, and I think we're in a time now that more than ever, there's more dogs living in houses with families. I would probably say more families have got dogs than what they used to. And there was a massive spike in that during COVID and lockdown because everyone thought it was a good time to get a dog. So maybe families that wouldn't have had a dog previously have now got them as well. So I think that's got a big part to play in it. And we'll go on to talk about social media in a bit. But Claire, what would you like to say on that?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Since COVID, there's been a massive rise in dog ownership, but I think there's also been a massive rise in dog ownership of people that hadn't had dogs before and perhaps not understanding, researching the breeds that they're bringing into their family homes, not understanding the needs of those dogs and how to train them effectively to prevent future problems. Without a doubt, 100% since COVID, the amount of dogs that I see with behavioural problems has surged. The amount of dogs that I see with a lack of rules and boundaries, a lack of general good manners has surged. So it's really not surprising that we're seeing an increase on dog aggression and dog attacks when you've got things like this happening and people essentially treating a dog, which is a predator, like a furry baby.
Yeah, and I think that's a sort of phrase that's thrown around a lot these days, isn't it? Fur babies, and that we're not their owners, we're their guardians, or I forget what other terms there are, there's loads. But yeah, that's definitely been a switch, and they have become more children-like, and there's more things to buy for your dog. You can dress them up, you can have perfume for them and X, Y, and Z. Sam?
That is pretty much what I was about to say, actually. Just that these days dogs aren't really treated as dogs anymore. We as a human race seem to have forgotten that they are a completely different species. And whilst they are our best friends and we want to do our best by them, at the end of the day, they have their own agenda for life. And it's up to us, as Claire said, as their guardian, as their owner, as their pet parent, however you want to term it, it's up to us to give them those clear boundaries and rules. And within that, happy environment, you can then have lots of fun. But if you treat your dog like a child, then there's going to be confusion there, because you can't expect one species to understand the rules of another species, if that makes sense. Claire?
I totally agree. And I think not only are we seeing a rise in dog attacks, we're seeing a rise of dogs with anxiety problems, dogs who lack rules and boundaries. They don't have good leadership from their owners. So they're making unwise decisions in life in general. We're seeing dogs with recall issues. We're seeing dogs with chasing issues. We're seeing dogs with anxiety. We're seeing dogs with aggression problems. And I think you've only got to really look deep. And when you speak to the owners of dogs with these kinds of problems, so often the dogs are being given far too many choices in life. And what I mean by that is they're not being shown how to live safely in our world. They're being given far too many options, not enough rules and boundaries. And this doesn't mean being like harsh with the dogs or not having fun with the dogs. But they are another species and they are a predator, and they will take opportunities to do what they find self-rewarding. And if we don't educate the dogs otherwise and show them how to fit in and live in our lives, it's no wonder we're going to end up with these behavioural problems.
Yeah, and when we're talking about leadership, we're not talking about being domineering and the alpha, are we? We're talking about just being those role models to help, like you say, guide our dogs into making better decisions that's beneficial to them. I think quite often we forget, like you said then, that dogs live in the moment. They do things that better their position, and anything that doesn't better their position they won't do more of. So it's about understanding that and guiding them to make the right choices. Sam?
Absolutely that. So just making it really clear to them, but as you say, never in a harsh or abusive way, never in a domineering way, just in a, this is good, you get rewarded for it. Chasing that deer across that road, that's not so good. So we're not going to allow you to do that. So it's educating your dog or your puppy to make those correct choices that then give you more opportunity to reward. But also, I think we've often spoke about having an understanding of those genetic instincts, the inherent traits that dogs have, so that you can utilize them or give the dog an outlet to practice those, which then helps build your bond, if nothing else. It keeps the dog stimulated, it builds your relationship with them. And in theory, take the Cocker Spaniel, for example, if you give it an outlet to use its nose and to hunt, then it's going to have less of a desire to bog off across the field and hunt. I've digressed slightly away from the topic of dog attacks, but just to give a bit of a broader spectrum there of rules, boundaries, and clarity.
Yeah, and leading on from that, Sam, I was going to say to you guys, what are the types of breeds that you're working with mainly for the behaviour issues? I know a lot of the dogs that I work with are gun dog breeds that maybe haven't been fulfilled, like Sam said, haven't had correct boundaries put in, haven't been fully understood. We get a lot of resource guarding in the spaniels, which then leads to aggression and things like that. What do you two find?
Working breeds in general, I think, yeah, obviously, primarily a lot of the dogs that I work with are gun dog breeds because of gun dog training being my passion. But from a behavioural perspective, most of the dogs that I see for behavioural work are working breeds of some description, whether that be your Dachshund. People forget that they were bred to do a job. Herding dogs, so collies and such like. Basically, any breed that has been bred to do a job, and a lot of the time these jobs do involve the predatory sequence that the dog goes through. If they're not given structure, rules and boundaries and an outlet for those innate behaviours, like you said earlier, Sam, then you're going to see behavioural problems. And aggression is very high on that list for several reasons. But yeah, working breeds without a job are not great. And I think the thing is as well, we also I see a lot of cockapoos, but we've got to remember the two breeds put together to create a cockapoo are both working breeds. And I think people just look at them and think they're cute and fuzzy and forget this, they were genetically working dogs. So I think if a lot more thought was put into what you're buying, then you're going to have less problems. But yeah, personally for me, working dogs. Sam?
Same as you, Claire. Obviously, the dogs that I see are more, or they tend to be more biased towards working dogs because that is one of the specialities, my passions, like you, for dog training. So I would say the majority of the dogs that I see are spaniels, collies, anything that's got that prey drive in their genetic makeup and is potentially not being utilized or not fully understood. It might be that the owner has got a cocker spaniel and has understood that it needs to hunt, but hasn't quite understood how to train it to hunt within a parameter rather than 4 fields away after a flock of sheep, for example. So, yeah, I think you explained it really well, actually. I don't know if there's a lot I can add to that. Jem?
I was just going to say, the 2 gun dog breeds that I see the most of at the minute for behavioural problems is Cocker Spaniels and Labradors. Sam, Jem, are you the same?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think leading on from what Sam just said about not understanding what those dogs are supposed to do, yes, we've seen a massive rise in poo crosses. So you've got your Cavapoos, your Cockapoos, your God knows what poos, because I think they look cute as well. And people think they're going to make great family pets, but they don't understand the breeds that genetically make them up. Unfortunately, we've then got social media that you add on top of this, which then exacerbates all those issues, and it shows you good and bad stuff. But if you don't know what's good and bad, how are you supposed to understand what's good and what's bad for your dog? There's lots of videos of dogs chasing birds and things going, look, my dog's hunting. And people think that's what they're supposed to do. So Claire, what do you think about social media and how it's affected sort of people and their dogs?
I'm really glad you just said what you said, Jeff, because the amount of times I'm contacted by people that think their dog is going to be amazing at gun dog training because it chases birds. And I'm like, no, the dog isn't supposed to chase the bird. The dog is only supposed to retrieve the bird or the thing when they're told to do it. It's not chasing. But anyway, yes. So I'm glad you said that, Jem. But yes, social media is really actually quite terrifying, I think. And people need to remember that what on social media is just snippets or clips of something happening, and you're not seeing the full picture. And I think for me, one of the scariest things is seeing dogs being pestered, is the word I'm going to use, pestered by children on social media. And I even get this with my inquiries when people contact me. They'll say, I need help getting my dog to behave around my child. And I'll ask how old the child is, and I'll ask how old the dog is. And they'll say, the dog is 6 months and the child is 9. And I'm like, okay, so you need to actually be educating the child on how to behave around the dog. Obviously, dog training is a massive part of this, but your child needs to be told what the rules and boundaries are. Now, the problem is on social media, you've got pictures of seemingly cute scenarios where children are hugging dogs, and you've only got to look at the dog's body language to see how uncomfortable that dog is in that scenario. And you can see from the video or the photo that this dog is screaming out for help. Don't let this happen. And so people see all this social media and they think it's okay for the child to be pulling the dog's ears, pulling its tail, putting its hand in its food bowl, moving its food away. All these things that we see, people think that's the norm and that's okay because that's what they say on social media. And then they're expecting us to tell the dog how it should behave around the child, when actually the child is actually the one that speaks English and needs to be told how to behave around the dog. Sam?
I completely agree. And I think obviously you just used like a 9-year-old child as your example, but I think a lot of people are very quick to make excuses for a young child because he's too young to understand. But children are actually quite clever. And whilst in certain ways for certain things, they could be quite slow to develop and mature, you can still start educating them from very early on. But much like when you're educating a puppy, you wouldn't expect the child to sit there and listen to a 6-hour lecture all in one go. It's just that drip feeding. Now, I don't want you to jump on the puppy, or if you jump on the puppy, I'm going to put you in a different room. And I'm not saying abandon your child in a different room, don't get me wrong, but just give the puppy and the child a bit of space, or I don't want you sticking your fingers in the puppy's crate while the puppy's trying to sleep. And even a toddler can understand that concept. You might have to repeat it, what you feel, a lot of times, but they can get it from an early age. Jem?
Yeah, a lot of the videos and photos that are on social media with kids and dogs does genuinely make my blood run cold a lot of the time. I've seen children riding Dobermans around and you're like, really? Why are you letting that happen? Because you just know at some point that's going to go terribly wrong, or not if the people are incredibly lucky. But as we look at social media, it's not just kids, is it? You see so many adults doing things just because they think it's funny. Like there was one I shared with you guys the other day of someone poking their dog's foot, saying, oh, look how touchy they are. And it was flicking its foot away and giving side eye. It was not happy that this person was poking its foot. But clearly the person thought it was funny and it got them views on Facebook or Instagram or whatever it was on. And there's so many of those videos, like people with their faces in their dog's face while it's growling at them, going, oh, you're so grumpy. It's like, what? Why are you doing that? Why are you showing this on social media? And quite often, a lot of them do go wrong and they actually show the dog biting at their faces. But still, it gets views, doesn't it? So they don't care. But I think that's got a lot, not fully to blame, a lot to blame with how people are interacting with their dogs because they've seen other people do it and they think it's funny. Claire?
The bizarre thing is, on one side of the coin, you've got people saying that dogs should be given choice and they should be given freedom to do whatever. But then you see exactly what you've just described on social media, the dog being put into situations where it's incredibly uncomfortable. Now, how polar opposite is that and how confusing is that for the dog? So from me, with my dogs that I raise and what I educate my clients to do is to build a resilient dog, to teach a dog that it is okay to be restrained, to be handled, to be touched. But I still wouldn't let a child do those things to my dog. I teach the dog to do that because I need the dog to be able to cope with that when it goes to the vets, when it needs emergency treatment, when I need to get something off of its, maybe it's picked up a tick or something like that, whatever it might be. I want the dog to be 100% confident, happy and comfortable with being handled. But that doesn't mean that I'm then going to allow a child to do something to my dog, right? So then you flip that around when you've got these dogs that are not shown rules and boundaries and not shown how to be resilient and won't be handled. How many dogs do we hear of at the moment that need to be muzzled or need to be medicated to take to the vets because they're too stressed in the vets? But then at home, they're supposed to be okay with the child climbing all over them. Figure that out if you can, because for me, that just blows my mind. And it's so in that scenario, for me, no wonder dog attacks are on the rise, because these dogs can't cope with the most minute amount of stress, let alone unfamiliar and seemingly much worse stress. So when you throw it around like that and you really dig into it, it's no wonder we're getting problems with dog attacks. Jen?
No, and we've become far too complacent that dogs are family members now, not dogs. I was speaking to my mum about it a few weeks ago on how she's dealt with the dog and us as kids. And at no point were we left in that room alone with our dog. And that dog that we had growing up was the nicest, kindest Labrador that you would ever meet. He wouldn't do anything. But at no point were we left alone with him until we were older and we could be trusted that we wouldn't do anything stupid. But I think these days we believe that these dogs are super friendly, they love us all, and they wouldn't ever hurt the kids because they're part of the family. Dogs don't think like that. So I think we need to sometimes just take a step back and go, look, I need to protect my child. Ultimately, they're the most important. But I also need to protect my dog from the child. I don't know what that child's going to do when I leave the room. And it might not be anything aimed at the dog. The child might move quickly or do something that frightens the dog. Yeah, just thinking on that. Sam?
Yeah, I was just about to say that people, if I'm talking to this with clients or friends, or not you guys, because you guys know, but you'll say to them that the majority of children being bitten, it normally happens around the child's face. You say to them, it's not that the dog was necessarily aiming for the child's face. The child is actually a lot shorter than we are. So if the child trips up, if the child falls towards the dog, or if the child is just being a pain in that dog's backside, then the dog's mouth is at the same level as the child's nose. So whereas if the dog had gone for an adult, it probably would have been about knee height, let's say, or thigh, hip, waist, that sort of thing. To a child, it's the child's head area, the top half. So I think that's why a lot of those bites are more damaging. That's people can get bitten on the arm and it's very damaging. But I hope if a child is bitten in the face, then potentially more harm is going to be done than if an adult was bitten on the leg. Potentially, not always. But like you said, Jem, we've just been led now to believe that they are that extension of our family and that they should be treated the same as our family and they are equal to us and our children. And the human race as a whole, I think, genuinely has forgotten it is a dog, not a human. It's a dog. Claire?
Yeah, they were really good examples you just gave there. And I think also one of the reasons it's the face is because how many times on social media do you see children going in to kiss the dog? And you can see the dogs like pulling back. Nobody can see because it's a podcast, but like I'm doing an impression of Whale Eyes very badly. You can see that the dog is literally like, is somebody going to get me out of this situation? And they're videoing it instead of getting the dog out of the situation because it looks really cute. And so that's another reason that the face is an area that's targeted, is because the kids are going in with their face to kiss the dogs, to look into my eyes kind of thing. And the dog is, get out of my space. People forget for dogs, we teach our dogs through training that looking at us is a good thing. But if you think about dog to dog behavior and dog to dog, how they socialize together, generally dogs don't stare at each other in their eyes unless they're being confrontational. So you've got your child staring at the dog might perceive that as being confrontational. So I think we have to remember that we're communicating with the dog in a way that the dog is, it's not natural to the dog. And if you thought about how a dog would communicate with a dog, it's not how we're communicating with a dog. Jem, Sam?
Yeah, and something you were saying there, Claire, it triggered something in my head. So when you were saying about obviously a child going into the dog's face and give them a kiss and whatever, and often younger children, when they're trying to find their balance, they pull themselves up on anything. So it might just be that they've gone in, they've given the dog a kiss, the dog sat there with its whale eyes and it's going, get this thing off me. And the child loses its balance and it grabs the first thing, which happens to be the dog's mouth. And it pulls down on the dog's mouth and the dogs get off me. And you've also got the whole repetition thing. So how many times previously did that child do similar? Did it stumble over the dog? How many times has it shoved its face in the dog's face and all that sort of stuff before the dog then goes, I have had enough of this. I've asked for help 12 times. Nobody has come to rescue me. Now I'm going to escalate my way of asking for help.
Yeah, I think that's a massively valid point, Sam. And quite often the dog will growl and get told off for growling. So the next time it won't bother growling, it will just bite because nobody listens to it asking for help. So trying to stay on topic, because we are a bit naff when Joe's not here at staying on topic. If we were talking to a parent or someone that's expecting a baby, what sort of advice would you give them to best safeguard their children and their dogs?
One of the first things that I suggest if people have got a dog and they're going to be bringing a baby into the home is to make sure that before that baby comes, you've got the dog used to the rules and boundaries that are going to exist when the baby comes, so that when the baby comes, the dog's already okay with this is the way life is now. And also let the dog get used to the new things in the home that are going to be there for the baby, like the pram and the cot and things like that. So that, again, it's not like the baby comes and all of this alien stuff suddenly appears with the baby and all of a sudden the rules change for the dog because this baby has appeared. So one of the first things that I say is safety management, and in advance, put in your structure, your rules, your boundaries, so that your dog is already living that way before the baby comes along. Sam?
Yeah, and you can go, I'm sure you advise this as well, and I hope you advise it as well, Claire and Jem, things like baby talcum powder, baby wipes, baby shampoo, and even if you've got videos online, sounds of babies crying. So You're trying to get the dog used to the sights, the sounds, and the smells of everything that's going to change, so that literally the one thing that is new when the baby comes home is the baby. Everything else it has got really accustomed to. And then when the baby gets there, making sure that you are spending time with your dog without your baby as much as you can. Get your partner to look after the baby for a bit so you can spend time with the dog, so the dog doesn't just feel straight away pushed out. It's going to have a big enough adjustment without then resenting this small, noisy, smelly thing that's just appeared in its home as well. Jem?
So say we've got a dog at a later date when our kids are a little bit older, what sort of introductions and rules and boundaries and things would you put in place at that point?
You're going to hate me. I'm going to say it depends on the dog. I think it does, though. I think if you've got a puppy, then you've got to teach your older children right from day dot that puppies need a lot of rest and you can't chase it around the garden too much. You've got to teach your older children the rules and the boundaries that the puppy is going to have just as much as you've got to teach the puppy. But if you've got an older dog from a different background, perhaps you've rehomed it from somewhere else, then anything you do, you're still going to have to make sure your children are consistent with what you're doing and what you're telling them. But it obviously might not be as simple as just saying leave the puppy alone when it sleeps and don't let it nip you, etc. Claire?
Yeah, you pretty much covered what I was going to say on that little sideline there. Again, yes, for me, it really does depend on the dog, whether it's a puppy, whether it's a dog coming from another home or a dog coming from a kennel or a dog coming from abroad. There could be so many factors that need to be considered with that dog to protect the family, to make the dog feel safe, to teach the dog how to live in our world. If you think about a dog that's come over from a foreign country, perhaps a street dog or something like that, it's never even lived in a home before. It's gone from the street potentially into kennels and then brought across the seas and ferried around and shipped around and then dumped in this completely alien environment. That dog is going to need a very different start and setup to a puppy that was born an hour away, that you've picked up at 8 weeks old and brought home and started working with from scratch. But I think regardless of the age of the dog and the dog's background, the importance of the family all singing from the same song sheet, all teaching the dog from day one, this is how you live in our environment, this is how you thrive in our world. We will protect you, we will raise you, we will feed you, but there are rules around that. So I think educating the family when you're bringing a dog into a household is just so important.
Yeah, you two went deep then and started talking about foreign rescues. I was just talking about an average dog, but yeah, you're totally right. It is massively dog dependent. And I think setting those same rules with your children and whatever age they are still massively important. I remember teaching my niece when she was very young actually how to touch a dog, because toddlers tend to grab as a natural response. They like to hold on to things. So just teaching to gently, and that only happens when I'm around. You don't touch the dog when I'm not around. You don't touch the dog when they're in their beds. You don't touch their food bowls. You don't take things off them. All those things, so that they just become second nature to the child. Oh, we don't do that. We don't play with Fido when he's doing that, or we don't play with Fido when he's in his bed, and try and make it easy for kids to understand. Claire?
Yeah, I think we're talking very much about the home, the children, the dogs, that sort of thing. And it's so important because a lot of these dog attacks and deaths by bites that we're seeing are happening in the home or happening with family dogs. These are not street dogs that this is happening with. But I think one of the things that people need to also be very aware of outside of the home environment is the Dangerous Dog Act and how that applies to how you raise your dog. Because so many people are okay with their dogs running up to other people, jumping up other people, and it actually freaks me out. So the thing that really frightens me sometimes is when I get contacted by people with 1-year-old dogs, 9-month-old dogs, 18-month-old dogs, and they say that their dog is still very puppy and it's jumping up them and mouthing them through excitement. And I'm like, okay, your dog needs to understand very quickly that this is not okay. Because if your dog does that to the wrong person, they're in the Dangerous Dog Act in mind, and your dog runs up to somebody, could be a child, could be an elderly lady, could be me, and jumps up them and mouths them, your dog is now a dangerous dog in the eyes of the law, and you're putting your dog at risk. And so educating our dogs, training them to have a good recall, teaching them not to jump up people are so important, because your dog only has to make someone feel threatened for them to have a case against you, for an offence to have been committed. So your dog hasn't actually have got to physically touch that person, but you will already technically have a dangerous dog on your hands. Sam?
I think that's a really valid point to make there, Claire. And just to put further emphasis on it, maybe your dog has ran up towards someone that, for whatever reason, is terrified of dogs. So it could be that your dog is 5 foot away from said terrified person. But if that said terrified person feels threatened, then technically your dog is deemed a dangerous dog. So it is the eyes of the law. They favour the humans, which you would expect them to do. But at the end of the day, that's one of the reasons why it is your responsibility to make sure that your dog, like Claire said, has those good recalls, ignores people and dogs coming past. But as you were talking then, Claire, I just wondered if we could have a Dangerous Child Act. And we could say, if your child runs up to a stranger's dog and pets it without asking, could that become a thing? Because, and I say this slightly in jest, but I do think that's also a big thing in the whole teaching children how to act around dogs. The amount of children that have run up to me with my dogs and they've started stroking my dog, playing with my dog, and not one of them, or very rarely, should I say, do they ask, is it okay if I pet your dog? And I think that's a really important thing to teach a child. You've got to teach them to acknowledge the adult or whoever is looking after that dog at that point and make a point of asking, not just assuming. And the amount of children that go, it's okay, I've got dogs at home. Okay, you have got dogs at home, but you haven't got this dog at home. And for whatever reason, this dog might not like you, might not like children, might not like any other stranger. And there was one other thing, just going back a little bit, that's something one of you said, and I can't remember who, was about dogs in the home and breaks and things. And I thought, you know what, a lot of people that either you hear firsthand, secondhand, thirdhand, whatever, but they'll say, oh, I just popped to the toilet, or I just popped to open the door. And that's when things happen between dog and child in the home. So I think it's worth just being aware as well that it only takes a few seconds for something to go drastically wrong. And it might be that the dog was giving lead up signs that were missed before it happens, or it might be that the dog has gone, I can't do anything because she's watching. And as soon as she goes to answer the door, the dog thinks, this is my chance to get my message across. But I will stop waffling for a minute. Claire?
I was just going to say, obviously we're talking here about dog attacks and we're talking about ways to avoid them and ways to educate the dogs to prevent things happening. But it's also worth mentioning, because we have mentioned about dogs and recalls running up to other people and other dogs. A lot of people are not aware that if your dog attacks a assistance dog or a police dog, then that is an offence as well. A lot of people think because it's dog on dog, they're going to get away with it, which is not an okay thought to have anyway. But if your dog ran up to and attacked an assistance dog or a police dog, that is an offence as well. You might not realise that dog 20, 30 yards away is an assistance dog, and you might think it's quite harmless that your dog goes running over there. But if that dog is working and perhaps isn't wanting social interaction with your dog, and your dog in question has run over and then starts on this other dog, that's an offence. So I think people need to be much more aware of where the law sits on this.
Yeah, quite often we talk to owners a lot about the Dangerous Dogs Act, and they're not aware that their dog doesn't actually have to hurt someone. It just becomes an aggravated offence if your dog causes injury as well as being dangerously out of control. I am going to try and start wrapping this up though, because I'm aware that we've been talking quite a while. Is there anything you guys want to add to what we've just spoken about before I start to do that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add as well that in amongst the Dangerous Dogs Act, if your dog is in your own home and either attacks someone in their own home or makes that person feel threatened in the dog's own home, at that point it's classed as a public place. So actually, you can't say that person came into my house and the dog was in its own house. That's not going to stand up in court. So it is your own home at that point is classed as a public place as well.
The person has to be invited in though, right? Or they're doing a job.
No, burglars don't count. But you've invited, I don't know, a delivery chap's brought you a parcel and you've invited him in. And as he bent over to put the parcel down, your dog bit his bottom. Then your dog could be classed as a dangerous dog at that point.
So I was going to just add as well that not only does the Dangerous Dog Act apply to the owner, it also applies to whoever is in charge of the dog at the time. So that could be your dog walker or your pet sitter. So just throw that in. But Jen, you asked for roundup tips. So a couple of roundup tips there. You wanted us to wind in. So a few things that I would always sort of recommend is training and education for your dog. If you don't know how to train your dog, a good recall, not to jump up, good manners, get a trainer to help you. That's what trainers are there for, is to help people train their dog. So don't wing it. Don't just assume your dog will always be okay. I would certainly recommend everybody gets help if they've got behavioural things going on with their dogs and they have listened to this podcast and perhaps think, oh, I maybe have that problem. Get some help.
Yeah, and so Claire has given some absolutely fantastic advice there. So I'm going to come away from the actual dog and human advice, if you like, and go back to what we were talking about social media. And I think my biggest advice with seeing things with dogs on social media is either take a lot of it with a pinch of salt or become like a forensic investigator and actually really watch the videos and watch the dog and watch whatever the dog is interacting with and see if you can see a different picture to what that initial 30-second video is trying to put out there to get those likes that you spoke about earlier, Jem, just to get a bit of a different stance on things.
Thanks, guys. And I think it's really important to remember that a lot of the aggression we see are not dogs that are what I would call aggressive aggression. So it's usually coming from a place of fear, a place of confusion, a place of frustration, possibly pain, sometimes a bit of resource guarding. So these are all sort of behaviors that can be worked with. There's very rare a dog that just truly wants to eat you. Don't get me wrong, they are out there, but there's usually a root cause to the issues. And it's important that these are picked up on early so that you can work with someone who knows what they're doing and help and guide you in what to do next. And let's not forget, the highest bite rates aren't from dangerous dogs. They are from our normal pet breed dogs like Labradors, Cockers, Cockapoos, God knows what else. The actual bite rates in dangerous dogs are fairly low. Unfortunately, when those bites do happen, they tend to result in more fatalities. But bear in mind that those bite rates are really high in your average pet dog. So it's not something that doesn't happen.
Dog owners, be responsible, train your dog, educate your dog, be a good leader figure to your dog, and just you're protecting your dog by doing so. Sam?
No, exactly what you've just said. And also alongside, obviously, educate your children as well. You want to raise your children to be rounded, I was going to say obedient, rounded and socialized and responsible young adults when you send them off into the big wide world. So start that education around animals at a young age, start the education of your animals at a young age, and you can all then live in harmony and happiness.
That sounds like a beautiful world, Sam. Advocate for your dogs, I think, is our main message, and get training in as soon as possible and look for the early warning signs. And that way, like you say, you can live in that harmonious land that Sam wants to live in. Thank you very much for talking tonight, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we will look forward to seeing you next week.
That's it for today's episode. A massive thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to head over to the LWDG and sign up for our membership. Get access to expert-led training, a wonderfully supportive community, and the resources you need to become a confident and skilled gun dog trainer. Let's take this journey together, because no woman should have to train her gun dog alone. We'll see you all next week.